Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. We define human optimization as the ability to do more while simultaneously improving our well-being. One of the keys to that is defining what more means to you, because it's different for all of us. The other key is linking up that more with your well-being. Many people feel that in order to accomplish more, their well-being automatically has to suffer. But I don't think that's the case. And we're going to tell you why in our session today titled, How to Improve Performance and Increase Well-Being Simultaneously. Our guest today is Dr. Graeme Rosenberg, who is a thoracic surgeon at the Keck School of Medicine of USC. He's the Director of Performance and Wellness for the Department of Surgery and leads the development of the PEAK Collaborative, which stands for Performance, Education, and Applied Knowledge. It's a multidisciplinary initiative dedicated to optimizing the technical, cognitive, and psychological dimensions of sustainable surgical performance. He trained at Middlebury College, Yale University, and Stanford. Through his leadership, he's teaching high performers how to continue to achieve more while improving their well-being. And the three big questions that we have today for Graeme are, number one, how do we define performance and well-being, and what's their relationship with one another? Second big question, why does it seem like our performance and well-being are often in competition with one another? And then in the third section, we'll try to get into some practical solutions for you. And our question there is, what practical steps can we take right now to allow us to achieve more while simultaneously improving well-being? Well, Graeme, thank you so much for joining us on the Human Optimization Project. We really appreciate having you today.
Yeah, of course. Looking forward to it.
Good. I think it's going to be a really good discussion, and it kind of underpins really all of the topics that we talk about in this podcast and this project. So I think it's going to have a lot of relevance for our audience. So first, I think it's important to start with some definitions. So in this first section, we're going to talk about how we define performance, how we define well-being, and then we'll talk about how the two are related to one another. So first, let's start with performance. So when you say performance, what exactly are you referring to?
Yeah, great question. I think when people think about performance outright, they usually are thinking about the execution of a task or an action with some intended objective. And that's usually measurable in some way, like speed or quality or volume or standards. But the performance that I like to think about is more integrative performance. So I define performance as an equation, and that equation involves abilities and internal factors, sort of the inner game, and all of those components are compounded or multiplied by external factors like your surroundings, your culture, the people and teams that you interact with regularly. So it really comes down to execution of a task by a human, someone with their own personal values, priorities, and situation for an intended objective that they have of interest that can be measured in some way, but importantly, is sort of rooted in what it means to be human, right? So there's a physical aspect, there's a psychological and emotional aspect, and then there's a cultural aspect of where are you performing, who are you performing with, and what is the outcome of interest for you and the team.
Okay, that's a very rich definition, and I'm teasing several things out of that. So one, you talked a little bit about the individual's abilities. So there's sort of your physical abilities to actually carry out the task and execute it. You also mentioned sort of the inner game, which is going to be the psychological component to that. So those are sort of the things under the control of the individual. And then you also said there's sort of and you raise it to the power of their environment. So sort of the situation that they're in or the location they're in or the resources they have around them. So there are going to be certain things that are directly under our control, and then certain things that maybe aren't under our control, but that we need to be thinking about in terms of our environment and who and what we're surrounded with. The other thing you mentioned was sort of the outcome of interest, and I want to take a minute just to talk about that because I think one of the key elements for me is that performance is generally up to the individual person to decide or determine. When I talk about defining human optimization, I say it's
Mhm.
the ability to do more while improving well being, but the more is whatever that person wants it to be. So, a
Yeah,
big part of this, I think, is figuring out what your more is. Like, what is it? What is your objective? What are you trying to achieve? And in reality, there's 8 billion of us on the planet. There's 8 billion different definitions of
exactly.
more.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's where some of the hard work comes in. A lot of people, I don't think, spend the time to understand what their objective really is down to sort of first principles, because it really requires someone to take the time to understand their values, their priorities first, and then base the objective or the goal that they have in mind around their own personal values and priorities. Once you have a good sense of those two things, and I'm not saying it's easy to understand what your own values and priorities are, but it's very helpful to spend the time to understand that. You can really start to develop that more that you're talking about, that objective or goal. And that is where you can start playing around with this idea of performance optimization. But without a good understanding of the first two things, your values and your priorities, then it's just stuff, right? And maybe the objective that you're chasing isn't doesn't have anything to do with you. And I believe that's an area where we start to walk into dissatisfaction or burnout or unwellness because our objectives are not personalized.
And I think the personalization concept is critical. You have to do that. I think it's a great starting point. What are your values? What's your mission? What's your purpose? What's your vision? And then you also have to consider that in the context of the environment that you're in. So you can't make this thing completely selfish about 100% you all the time and then ignore the environment because you mentioned
Absolutely.
it's sort of raised to the power of the environment. So I think it behooves us to understand our own personal values, goals, vision, mission, and then to also say, okay, this environment that I'm in, what is their purpose? What is their vision? What is their mission? And then are the two of them aligned? Are my goals aligned with the environment's goals? If so, we have a recipe for success. If not, something's got to change. Either I've got to make some adjustments, I can try to adjust the environment, or maybe I need to find a new environment.
I think you point that out really well, right? So you could be, let's bring this back to sports because I think it's a great sort of example in storytelling. So you could be the best baseball player technically, right? Like you could have the abilities of a home run hitter. You can have that solid mental game where you've got calm under pressure, you know what you need to improve upon, where your strengths and weaknesses lie. But if the organization or the environment that you're trying to perform in is suboptimal, you're not going to win the World Series, right? So just as you said, it's a two-way street. Can you influence the environment in any way that allows your individual performance goals to be aligned with the environment or the culture that you're in? Do you have to change something about your interpretation or the context that you are showing up to perform with? Or do you have to find a new environment or a new team that may cultivate your talents in a different way that are more in line with your goals, your performance goals, to be successful long term?
Great. And we'll talk about how you actually do that when we get to the third section today. But I do think generally there is going to be an opportunity to find some alignment in there. You may have to do some digging, but usually you can.
Yeah.
I don't think jumping ship every time you're struggling is going to be the right answer. It's usually going to be working through it to find some alignment.
without a
So
doubt.
let's talk about common misconceptions. What are some of the most common misconceptions you see around the concept of performance?
Yeah, I think it all boils down to really this reductionist definition of performance, that you can do more, that you can do something faster, that you can have better volume, right? These are sort of the industrial ways of thinking about performance. Like how much can you do, how quickly can you do it, and how like
How
at
cheap?
what quality
Yeah.
can you churn it out, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where people kind of get into a pitfall because those items of performance, right, are usually determined or heavily influenced by someone else, whether it's the company you work for or the team that you're on. So I think that's a pitfall. You have to get away from sort of this reductionist production element, like producing something as an idea of performance, and really get down to the human element of it. Like, what is the performance you want to bring? Like, it's a word we throw around a lot, but I think when you are able to bring that together to something that you find meaningful and really understand what that performance element that you can do over a sustained period of time is, you can start to play around with the different levers you can pull to improve your performance while maintaining this professional satisfaction or fulfillment with life that we like to call wellness.
So performance is not just about quantity. It's not just how much you can do. Obviously, there's a big quality element to it. Hey, how well can you do it? But I think beyond that, it's what is the impact of that action, and does that impact align with your vision, value, mission, and with your company or your environment? That's great. Well, let's shift gears now. Let's talk about the other term, well-being. When
Yeah.
we throw out this term well-being, you very commonly get a lot of eye rolls, frustration, negative emotions that come up from people, which is unfortunate because I think it was a term meant to help us and do some good. Sometimes people don't always feel that way about it. So why do we think that well-being commonly brings about these negative emotions for so many people?
Yeah, I think because it's hard. I think it's hard to have a sense of well-being in sort of the fast-paced modern uh, culture that we live in that is so outcomes oriented. Uh, I also think people are often stuck in living some other version of a story that they're being told that may not be their own story, right? They are chasing goals of a company while not finding a way to develop that alignment that we alluded to earlier. And I think importantly, well-being or wellness, and I think we should spend a little bit of time differentiating those two terms, always feels like an ad, right? Like you have all this stuff you need to do throughout your day. You need to do your job, you need to take care of your kids, and all of the stuff that we're told can improve your wellness often feels like another box to check on the endless list of things that you need to do, right? Like exercise improves wellness. That's something you gotta do. Sleep and all of the stuff around your nighttime or morning ritual can improve your well-being, but that's more stuff that you need to add to your day. Human connection, all these benefits of calling your friends, engaging with people that are close to you. That's super helpful for wellness and well-being, but it's another thing that you have to figure out time to do. And I think there's a dissonance there, right? Like all of these wellness related activities are usually given to the individual to do, and it's very rare that the culture or the organization or the environment that you're in is built to support well-being. But I really think that when you step outside of asking individuals to do more things only, and you start adding on environmental organizational support of people's well-being, that you really find success in promoting well-being.
Mhm. I do think it's a shared responsibility. I'm sure you see that at USC. We see that here at Mayo and in other places, and that There are organizational components to this where the organization, tries to help support and lift up well-being, but also there's individual contributions and understanding to this. And I think it's hard. I think honestly, well-being is like performance, and that I joked earlier that there's 8 billion different definitions of performance in the world. There's also 8 billion different definitions of well-being. It means something different to everybody.
Yeah.
So we have to spend the time figuring out, okay, what does well-being mean to me? And I think this is one of the reasons people get frustrated with it. You're right, because it feels like an add-on. It feels like there's a one-size-fits-all approach to it. Here are the things you have to do to improve your well-being. That may
Yeah.
or may not be the case, because I might define well-being a little bit different than you. But most of the time, people have not been intentional about defining what well-being looks like to them
Yeah.
and how they're going to go about doing it. So I think that's a huge misconception, and that's a great one. I'd like to talk. So now that we've kind of talked about those two things, let's talk a little bit about the links or common connections between performance and well-being.
Yeah, I think you alluded to one of the strongest links at first, which is oftentimes when you have a firm understanding of your values and priorities and you could set a goal that's rooted in those, you're working both on performance and wellness together, right? So well-being, I think another pitfall is people equalize well-being and happiness, and those are two very different things. I think well-being has a sense of joy involved in it, but it should more strongly position you towards fulfillment. Like what you're doing is fulfilling to you. Uh, so your question is, how are these linked? And I think that the way I think about performance is that wellness is intrinsic to being able to sustainably perform however you want to over time. If you're unwell, you can't perform well, right? Like that's the easy part of this conversation. If you are overtired, if you're stressed out, if you're not doing something that you find fulfilling, it's harder to reach that performance level that you are interested in. But in surgery, and I know this is probably true for a number of other actions, when you're performing well, when things are firing, when you feel that sort of flow and that click, like you're just on fire, that for me and a lot of the people I work with delivers well-being and wellness to you, right? Like when everything feels like it's working well and you're performing at a high level, that builds wellness, that builds a sense of well-being. So I think they're intrinsically linked, both in the negative. If you're unwell, you can't perform well. But as your performance increases, if you're able to link that to your well-being, you have a happy recipe right there to keep it going, to keep the momentum forward.
So I think what you said flies directly into the face of how most people view this. And I think a lot of people view performance and well-being at odds with one another. And they think, all right, if I focus on my well-being, my performance is going to suffer because I'm neglecting it. And
Sure.
vice versa. If I focus on my performance, my well-being is going to, but in reality, it's the opposite. And that if you
I
can
think
do what you said by rooting them in your values, vision, your purpose, and if you can understand and be fulfilled by them, then the two are actually linked directly. And that when
I,
one goes up, the other goes up. And
I
if one
believe
goes down,
so.
the other goes down. And I agree 1,000% with that. And that's sort of been my experience. And I think that if you have them disconnected, then you have an unhealthy vision or version of what one of those two things are, or maybe you just haven't defined them well enough for yourself. And I think oftentimes that's the case. It may be that you just haven't defined what performance is that you're looking for specifically, or what well-being looks like to you, because it's going to be different than everybody else's.
Yeah, you're pointing out something that, comes up with a lot of the busy residents in training that I work with here at USC, where they believe well-being is time off, right? They they believe like that is a very tangible thing. Like if I can work less, if I can rest more, if I'm not in the hospital, that equals well-being. I don't think that's correct. because that's not sustainable with the realities that we live in as professionals, you need to be able to find a way to link what you do at work, where you spend the majority of your time, or if it's not work, something that's your goal directed towards, writing a book, an artistic event, a sports event, building a family, right? If you are able to show or find ways to prove to yourself that those efforts that you're putting in are fulfilling and they're moving you forward towards your goals, that is wellness creating in and of itself. Even though you're working harder, it's harder because you chose to do it. And that is where the wellness piece comes in for high performing individuals, that you are really owning it. And when you own the performance element and what you have to bring to the table to perform consistently over time, wellness follows every time.
Mm. Yeah, and this gets back to something we talked about recently in one of our episodes with Andrea Tooley, where we talked about work-life integration. I agree. I think you have to give yourself permission to allow some of your purpose and meaning and impact to come from work. That's okay. You're
Yes,
spending a lot of time there. You might as well enjoy it. And you might as well feel like it's meaningful, no matter what your job is. You don't have to be a thoracic surgeon to do that. You can do it in any line of work, in any career.
absolutely.
On the same token, I think some of those, residents and folks you're talking about who think, well, time off equals wellness, I actually think that is not fair to have such a lofty expectation of your time off, because sometimes your time off is going to be really difficult because you got to use that time off to deal with problems at home or sickness or illness or and if you're expecting, yeah, all my time off is going to be, well-being time or wellness time, that's just simply not the case, because there's going to be headaches and frustrations that occur in your life outside of work. And so you don't want to set unrealistic expectations there. So I think that's going to transition us nicely into our second section, where we're going to talk about this and why we often feel like they're in competition. So a lot of people think that we can't have both the performance piece and the well-being piece. So they feel like working to achieve more means your well-being is going to suffer. We sort of alluded to this already, but I'd love to run through some more examples or reasons why many of us feel that way. I think it's a long list. Why are we set up to view it that way?
So your question is, why do we feel like we get these off balance, or that they're at odds with each other, performance on one end and wellness on the other? And I think it comes down to understanding that you can derive satisfaction, pride, and fulfillment from doing hard things, right? Like at the core of understanding your goal and your purpose, and that's what drives this pursuit of performance improvement over time, or human optimization, that journey, that path is satisfying. But oftentimes you need to understand that it's going to take work. And that work is the lifeblood of wellness, right? Like you are doing something that is meaningful to you, and you're putting in the effort and you're getting fulfillment out of it. So what I talk to people about a lot is, if they're trying to build a new habit or do something that is in service of their performance goals, they need to take the time to reflect on it, to feel it, right? Like if you make a decision that you're going to get up a little bit earlier so that you have some time in the morning to center yourself, take care of yourself, get focused for the day, and then perform at a high level that you want to, it is motivational to take a moment. It doesn't have to be a long time. It can be a minute to be like, hey, I did that this morning. I felt the difference that it made, and that was really satisfying, right? Or another example is, if you decide to take the stairs at work instead of the elevator, because it's hard to exercise every day, but you know that you feel better. Your mental health is better if you're moving more, if you're exercising. Congratulate yourself for taking the stairs. Like, you have to own those decisions that you've made to improve your performance over time. And when you recognize it for yourself, that is what builds this wellness, right? It's more fulfilling and satisfying to engage with those effort related activities to improve your performance But if what's the term I'm looking for here? Interoception. If you feel what you're doing is having a benefit, like that builds well-being over time. And so I think you have to spend a couple moments each day and tell yourself, like, I tried this, I did this, it worked, it didn't work, but I'm trying. I'm trying to improve my performance in a way that's relevant to me. And that's where the wellness starts to build, even though you're doing more in the action. You need to live in it, you need to own it. If you don't, if those things are disconnected, then yes, I can understand why performance and wellness feel at odds with each other. I love when you brought up that work-life integration. You need to do things that are important to your life overall. And like you said earlier, work is important to our life overall. And if you can link those two together, not only are you going to perform better over time, you're going to be more satisfied with your performance. Your work and your life are going to be fulfilling to you, and your well-being is going to skyrocket.
I hadn't thought about this before until you were answering that, but you talked about how so much meaning and fulfillment does come through doing hard things, but the key is to link them back to your purpose and see the impact they're having and know that there is meaning in what you're doing. I think one of the things our society tends to do now is we have this sort of hustle culture that
Yeah,
really brags about suffering just for the sake of saying we suffered rather than bragging about the process of growth or the outcomes. So,
yeah.
we like to say, "Oh, I woke up at, 4:30 this morning," or "I haven't slept in 3 days," or, "My life is so hard and here are all the reasons why." And just for the sake of talking about how much we're suffering, not
Yeah,
for any other reason. But what you're saying is you're not talking about that. You're saying when you can tie that hard work and that suffering and that culture or that hustle, mentality towards a goal that you
yes.
find meaningful and you can celebrate the progress that you're making in that, then you can actually get joy and satisfaction in that, which will improve your well-being as you're increasing your performance. When we do it the other way, when we just talk about our pain and suffering in the absence of it moving us towards a goal,
Yeah.
really all we're doing is we're decreasing our performance and we're making ourselves more miserable. We're decreasing our well-being. So that's gonna if we don't tie it to the purpose, it's gonna have the opposite effect.
Yeah, I've worked with this guy's, he's got so many great comments and ways of viewing concepts like this. And he would tell you that hustle culture, that's not performing, that's enduring. A lot of us out there are just enduring, right? And endurance is a finite resource. You can only keep going up to a certain point until it feels like your body's shutting down or things are falling apart around you. If you are able to change your mindset from endure, endure, endure to grow, improve, perform, you flip the script, right? And that requires a little bit of self-care, a little recovery, a huge dose of purpose and meaning that comes from you, your what we've talked about a lot, but also from the group of people you're working with or the organization that you're at. But if you align those, then it becomes less of an endurance event and it becomes a performance event. And that suffering diminishes because it's for something, it's for you, it's for a common goal. And that's where wellness really becomes linked directly with performance.
All right, you're setting some light bulbs off for me here, and that if we can link our suffering and hard work and hustle, to our purpose, then it becomes performance
Yeah.
rather than just enduring. I love that. That's phenomenal. And now I'm actually thinking about that on the flip side, the opposite end of the spectrum. If we think about rest, one of the problems is oftentimes we equate rest with laziness, but that's because we haven't tied the rest to our purpose and goals. So if we can tie the rest to our purpose and goals, then it becomes recovery instead of laziness, just like the hard work becomes performance rather than endurance if we tie it to our purpose and mission.
Yeah, I really talk in the work that we do here, I talk about recovery, not rest, right? Everybody needs rest, but that's not an action. Rest is something that happens, right? And there are so many different ways that you can recover. There's active recovery, which is going for a 10-minute walk in the middle of the day. That is active recovery, right? You are not focused on a task. You're getting outside, you're moving your body. Maybe you're doing it with a colleague or a friend. So you can start habit stacking these things that are active recovery elements. Because when you start viewing your time that's not engaged in the outcome of interest, you can start connecting those dots, right? If I sleep better, if I go to sleep consistently at the same time, if I bring in elements of active recovery throughout the day, even though that is rest in a way, its purpose is to improve your performance the next day or that afternoon or 2 weeks from now. So it becomes an action. I think this is where it's important to differentiate well-being from wellness. So well-being is what you as an individual find joyful, fulfilling, satisfying. It's a noun, right? Wellness is a verb. It's the actions you take to build your well-being. And so we educate surgeons and trainees here a lot about wellness, not well-being, because we give them actions that they can do so that they can build towards a well-being that's very personal and individualized to themselves.
That's phenomenal. Phenomenal. So, I mean, these links have been excellent. It's been really insightful. And ultimately, it seems like the key really comes down to tying all of this to your purpose, your goals, your mission, what you're trying to accomplish. I want to ask you this, though. Is there ever a time when you should intentionally separate performance and well-being? Or is it, or should they always be linked to one another? And maybe like an example of what I'm thinking of is, let's say you are an athlete or a surgeon or whatever, and your performance is struggling. You're having a really difficult time. You're underperforming. You're disappointing yourself, and you're having a hard time with that. At that moment, does it make sense to uncouple it from your well-being, or do you allow it to bring your well-being down?
That's a great question. Uh, and let me think through that a little bit here. I think that it's hard to uncouple them, in my opinion. But it's also okay if your wellness and well-being ebbs and flows. I feel like it's a bit of a barometer to what you're doing with your performance. If you feel like, let's say, for example, I want to be able to treat more people with lung cancer. So I focus on my referral patterns. I focus on getting people efficiently through the hospital system. I focus on my intraoperative performance so that I can get them safely through an operation. I may feel like this is at odds with my ability to recover effectively. And over time, maybe I'm not showing up to the level of performance that I want to be able to show up for each individual patient. So that will decrease my sense of well-being. So that well-being is a uh, it's a factor that tells me I need to change something. I need to reassess. I need to get reorganized and realigned towards our purpose, our mission here, so that both can happen at the same time. So I think that it could be um, challenging to uncouple performance and well-being, even though it could be favorable at times. I think that the one area where it may be easy is when you're actually able to take a break, right? Like use your vacation to really focus firmly on your wellness, right? That's why for sports, for special forces military, there are seasons, there are tours. Many of us, most of us in the world don't exist that way, right? Like every week is just another week. So every now and then, like you get the opportunity to take a week off or 10 days off or maybe longer if you're lucky, really lean into recovering, to feeling a sense of well-being through being with family, going to somewhere new. I think that's a safe way to kind of uncouple. Like, don't bring work with you when you have the opportunity not to, where so many of us will, check our work email or not put that out of office message on. And then the creep of work starts to enter a place that could be much more oriented towards developing your well-being. So I think there are a couple opportunities, but back to your question, I believe it's very challenging to uncouple them, but you can use your well-being as a barometer for, do I have to realign? Do I have to reassess how I'm approaching my performance at this season in life?
Yeah, so maybe in those instances when performance is suffering, couple things I'm hearing in there is that one, maybe that's a time to lean into the well-being part a little more, saying, okay, how can I rethink some things and how can I improve in this side? And then maybe, improve my well-being a little bit will prop up my performance. Or on the performance side, you say, ugh, the outcomes are not what I want them to be right now. Maybe I should back up, focus on the process, make sure I'm completing the steps that I need to, and have more of a process focused barometer of success. So, am I carrying out the steps I need to rather than just an outcomes based version of success? Like, did I achieve the goal? Maybe if you didn't achieve the goal, you got to say, okay, was my process okay? Did I show up? Did I do the right things? Did I take the right steps? If not, how can I make some adjustments? All right. So that'll segues into the third section here where we're going to start talking about some solutions. So we kind of threw a few solutions out there, but let's talk about it a little bit more. And so I want to talk about some real actionable steps that people can take now to actually improve both performance and well-being, to get these things coupled positively in a way that we can get them both going up. But before we do, I want to ask you, you've been working with some high performing people for a long time trying to do this. How hard is it? Can people actually do it, or is this an impossible ask?
I hope it's not an impossible ask. And I do see people improving over time. But I have to acknowledge that it's not going to happen overnight, right? Like, you're not going to go spend one evening thinking about, your purpose and your process and your values or your mission. I think it really has to evolve consistently over time. I think you need to regularly be thinking about it. So the reason I bring that up is you have to enjoy the journey. When you're trying to improve your performance or optimize something in any way, you are going to be successful if you find satisfaction in tinkering with it, in the journey of improving, right? If you think that you can start doing cold plunges in the morning and that's going to be the one thing that improves your performance, that's not going to work, right? Because it isn't rooted in anything. So to answer your question, I do think that it's very achievable, but you have to be willing to do the work and you have to iterate over time. And like I mentioned earlier, you need to acknowledge that you are actually putting effort into this, because that acknowledgement of it is going to motivate you to keep doing it.
Mhm. So let's outline. Let's talk about the work. Let's talk about what that actually looks like, and the steps people can be taking, and the things that they can actually do. And I have some thoughts on this, but I'd love. Why don't you get us started? What are some steps, actionable things people can start doing to do the work on this?
Yeah, I think step one, get a notebook. I don't advocate, I'm not a good journaler. I can't find the time to do it. But I've got a notes app on my phone where I have a little notebook, and I think it's really beneficial. Take a month, give yourself a month, and really think about, what are my values? What are my priorities? And what mission is both aligned for my personal goals and the team that I work on? I think doing that up front sets everything in motion, because when you have a clear sense of your values, priorities, and mission, you can start using those to design steps to get there. It also allows you this sense of when to lean in, when to lean out. If you really know what your values and priorities are, you have uh, a marker of how to set up your life, how to set up your efforts, as long as you're being honest to those. So I think that is step one. And don't try to do it overnight, but really sort of just jot down notes, read them back to yourself a week later, change them, just spend a month thinking
And I
about
would
that.
tell our audience, a lot of people say this is really hard. I don't know where to start or how to do this. It is hard. Just start though. Just
Yeah.
start. You won't get it perfect. And I also put a plug in. We're going to have a series that comes out on the Human Optimization podcast about getting to know yourself. And we're
Yeah.
going to do episodes dedicated to determining your values, your vision, your purpose, your mission. So be on the
Love that.
lookout for those. Those will come, and those should help with that. So now that we've sort of taken the time to start to define our values and purpose and our mission and our vision, what's next for us?
Yeah. Then I think the next step is action, right? You need to choose one or two things, and you need to change something about your behavior or your approach based on what you learned about yourself in a way that builds your performance. So you need to take two tangible things that you can change about your daily life, about how you show up to work, about how you lead conversations or communicate with others, whatever it is, but take two things and focus on them. You might not get it right the first time, what change that you're going to interject into your performance. And that's okay, because then it's not going to work. Or maybe you added it at the wrong time of the day, or your tact was off. But I think once you have a clear idea of your priorities, values, and your mission, you need to then take an action. And you need to persist on that action for long enough to know if it's making a difference in your performance.
And those actions, I think there's an infinite number of options, but it's something to get your actions and activities and behaviors to align with your values and vision and purpose. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So just figure out some way to carry out those values and purpose.
Yeah, because this concept of forward center of mass, like always being moving towards something. People say 1% better every day, the growth mindset. But the bottom line, the first principle of all of those turns of phrase is action. You need to be trying things out that will boost your performance. And you need to think over time, has it worked? Do I like how it's worked? Has this been a good fit for me? And if not, change it up. And that's where this whole thing becomes fun, right? I used to keep a little climber's journal. So I don't know if you know that concept, but Alex Honnold, free solos, El Capitan, right? He keeps this little climber's journal, and it'll have the date, and it'll have just like one or two comments on the route. Something tangible, something that you felt or you saw or you did differently, and you just keep notes, right? It can literally be one little sentence per day. To keep a climber's journal of your actions. Does it move the needle? Has your performance improved in the way you wanted it to? That's beneficial because the end run of all this is to connect that performance improvement with your well-being, right? And you can start connecting the dots if you keep little notes. And I don't do it anymore because it's become automatic, it's become internalized, but it's really beneficial to start with the action of jotting it down. Like these behavior changes that are now more in line with my values and priorities have moved the needle in an important way for me, and that was fulfilling,
So
right?
the thing I like about that is that you're sort of setting yourself up for process satisfaction there. So you're saying, all right, I'm going to try this action. I'm going to analyze, did it work or not work? If it worked, wonderful. You like to celebrate that. If it didn't work, there's always a tendency to say, well, I failed. No, you didn't fail. You just learned that didn't work. So you cross one thing off the list and you can move on. And so you have to change your mindset to where you recognize if something doesn't work, that's helpful information. That's good.
Yeah.
You should celebrate that now. Cross it off the list. Do something different. And that'll allow you to sort of start to fall in love with this process. That's great. So I'm going to make our third step, that exactly. So develop some process satisfaction.
Yeah, that's key. And there's a couple tools that people can use to help them like objectively feel it. That's where I have mixed feelings about sensors. I think some people focus heavily on various aspects of measuring their sleep or measuring their heart rate variability. But for me, it is beneficial to look at those trends over time to have some external marker of change. At first, when you're trying this out, like if you found that you want to focus on your sleep quality and consistency because you believe that will improve your performance the next day, then having a way to track your sleep over time is beneficial. But don't just track your sleep with no intended purpose. So some of these tools are helpful if you use them effectively to help you feel the change that you're trying to achieve in your performance, or show that when your wellness feels high, maybe there's a marker in there. Maybe it actually was your sleep. Maybe it was your exercise because you have those data points to interpret. But I think a sensor for sensor's sake is just noise unless you put the data to relevance with what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's very well said. Very well said. And I think too, after doing that, that then makes it a lot easier once you've gone through that process of sort of tying your values, vision, and purpose to your performance. Then it becomes really easy to do the same thing with your well-being. Right? If you start and you're rooted in that, then it's really easy, and you've learned how to tie it to performance. You tie it to well-being, and then the two sort of automatically become linked.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's where understanding when do you feel like your well-being is high? That's important because it's not, like I said earlier, well-being is not equal to happiness. Those are two different things. Like well-being can be so much richer, so much different, and it's so independent for each person. It's so individualized, right? So quality time with family is something that provides wellness for me. That's a wellness action that I take to boost my well-being. But not all moments of quality family time are happy, right? Like you have to get through some of the discomfort of the things that you find build your well-being because it's not about happiness, it's about fulfillment and growth and pursuit of your own mission, right? And that's where I think it's important to understand what well-being means to you. And when you do, you're exactly right. Those same influences over your performance are just linked to the outcome of enhanced well-being over time.
hmm And to add to this list, one of the things we haven't talked about a lot, but I think sort of goes without saying, but we should say it anyway. You're going to be able to do this a lot better if you're nailing a lot of the basics, like getting the sleep you need, eating a healthy, clean, reasonable diet with good nutrition, exercising and moving your body, eliminating unnecessary stress from your life, eliminating unnecessary toxins, and drugs, alcohol, like all that sort of stuff. So, cleaning some of that stuff up, I think, can be really helpful for people as well, because then that just doing that well creates more space for
Yeah,
you to understand this and link performance and well being. And it raises your ceiling as well in terms of what you can accomplish.
I really liked how you said that. It makes more space, it creates more space. Like you don't always have to sleep perfect or avoid alcohol or exercise all the time. But when you do find that you are consistently getting good rest, eating well, uh, adding a little bit of movement into your day, and avoiding things that can drop your performance and honestly your well-being, then you have a lot more space with which to play with. You can have the energy and time to go along this journey to understand what you're feeling. Is this working? You have a little bit of extra space. I've never really thought about it that way because it can feel overwhelming to do all of those foundational behaviors. But what it does, if you're consistent with it, like you said, it gives space to consider your performance in a much richer way.
And I think, as you said earlier, Graham, that there's a positive linkage and a negative linkage. And so it may feel overwhelming. You think, okay, goodness, now you're telling me I got to improve performance and well-being and sleep and nutrition and exercise. Like that's terrible. I'm not going to do it. But in reality, there's a positive synergy that occurs with all of those. And so if you improve any one of those things, even marginally, it will have a positive impact on all of the others. And it'll create more space for you to do that. And then you can start with the next step and then the next step. And so it is a stepwise approach. So don't feel like you got to come out of the gate and nail everything right away, but just make some forward progress in one of these areas, start building that positive momentum and synergy. And as you were going through that, I actually was writing down sort of a list of big pitfalls and mistakes that I've made in this process. I've been trying to do this for a long time now. And so I was thinking about, as you were talking, some of the things I've really gotten wrong with this. So I'm going to list off, you gave us a list of what to do. I'm going to give us a few things not to do. And then you feel free to add to that list if you want. But some of the mistakes I've made, number one, focusing on things that I can't control. I've made that mistake time and time again. So try to focus on what you can control rather than what you can't control. The second is adopting other people's definition of success. Graeme, you and I are really guilty of that in medicine. It's pretty easy to look at the people ahead of us and say, I want to be like that. And maybe you do. That's okay. Use them for inspiration, but don't directly adopt their definition of success. And then same, don't adopt the other's definition of well-being, because it's different for everybody. For some people, it is it's meditation, or it's yoga, or it's gratitude, or it's whatever. For other people, it's an intense workout, or it's home renovations, or whatever. You figure out your own definition of it, which is helpful. Don't strive for perfection. I've made that mistake, and then it only leaves you feel like a failure. You come up short and you're miserable along the way. And then also don't just strive for the outcomes. As you were talking about, the process satisfaction, I think that's important. So that's my quick little list of things not to do as you're on this journey of linking your performance and well-being. Anything else for you to add, Graeme, before we start to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think just two things. One is you're not going to nail it every time, right? It's okay. You should use that process aligned goal to just say, okay, I haven't been doing that well in the last few weeks. Time to make a change. Once you start getting into that negative spiral of like, oh, I didn't achieve that performance I wanted, my goal wasn't reached, my wellness feels off. It can feel like this downward spiral, but you have the capacity to reinterpret that with this performance mindset, right? Like, oh, I've noticed these things. I have a clear understanding of my priorities and value of my mission. So let's make some adjustments. Don't get stuck in that sort of negative spiral of I'm not performing well, I'm burned out, right? You have some control over changing your outlook towards that. I think that is a big pitfall that I've had. I've definitely had seasons where I'm just like, man, this is not good. This is not going well. I think sometimes people live in that for a long time, but you have the ability to change, right? You have the ability to do something different and lift yourself out of it, not quickly, but it's up to you, right? And then I did want to just make one comment as a quote that I heard about perfection. So you brought up perfection. And I love this quote. It boils it down perfectly for me. So perfection should be the engine, not the outcome. So that is, you're not striving for perfect, but this idea of hard work, high quality work, of striving towards perfection should be the engine, should be this motivating factor. Because I think in our culture, in modern society, like wanting to do something well or perfectly, it's a very valid feeling, but don't think of it as the outcome. Think of it as the juice, right? It's the perfection is the engine, not the outcome. And I've used that a lot in how I make choices or make changes and adjustments. And I find it a helpful mantra.
What a great quote. And I think all perfectionists have learned that the hard way, that there is no such thing as a perfect outcome. So I love that. That's a great quote. All right, so I've added that to my notes along with a whole page of other things. And so I'm going to recap those to give me a chance to summarize our discussion today. When we talked about performance, I loved your definition. You talked about it's your ability kind of multiplied by the inner game, raised to the power of your environment. And so that includes components of this is about yourself and making your own decisions and setting your own goals and priorities, but also being in an environment that is conducive to that and has similar goals and objectives and vision. But you have to define those things for yourself, and it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. When we talked about some important characteristics of performance, it's not just about quantity. It's not just about doing more. You also have to think about what is the quality of the work? What is the impact of the work? Does it fulfill you? And is it aligned with the people around you, the company around you, the team around you, or whatever it is that's around you? We talked about some of the reasons people don't like the phrase or concept of well-being because it feels like it's an ad. It feels like it's extra work you have to do. It feels like it's a box to check. Oftentimes it's presented to us as there's only one way to do it. Here's what you have to do to improve your well-being. And some people think it's a sign of weakness that they have to work on it. But you sort of flipped that on its head and talked about how we need to have individual definitions of well-being and individual approaches to achieving it. There's a lot of links between performance and well-being. One of the keys being that both should be rooted in our own values, vision, purpose, impact, and we should be able to get fulfillment with both of those. And if we can, then that starts that positive feed-forward loop. And if we are unwell, we can't perform well. But if performing well, that will improve our well-being. So they're not opposites. They actually flow in the same direction, up or down. And then why do we think that performance and well-being are in conflict with one another? We tend to think that way, that work, has to be painful and all performance-based, and well-being only comes from our time off, which is not true. They should all flow in both directions. You can get meaning from doing hard things. The key, though, is to tie that hard work and hustle and pain and suffering to your purpose and your meaning. And then it's not just enduring, then it's performance, which I love. And then we said the same thing about rest. If you can tie your rest to your purpose, then it's not laziness, then it's actually recovery. So tie both your hard work and your relaxation rest time to your purpose, and that can make it more meaningful. We can all do it, but it's not easy. It won't be quick. Enjoy the journey. And then we talked about steps to take. Get a notebook, define your values, vision, purpose, mission, and identities. And then once you do, start to take action. Go one action at a time and see how you can tie those to your performance and your well-being. We really talked a lot about process satisfaction. All of this is a journey. It is not a destination. You'll never achieve a position of maximum performance or maximum well-being. So it is a process and journey. You have to view it that way. And you got to continue to tie performance and well-being together, and to what degree you can improve on some of the basics like sleep, nutrition, and exercise. That's only going to help you. We talked about things not to do, so don't focus on things out of your control. Don't just adopt others' definition of success and others' definitions of well-being. Don't strive for perfection. Don't only focus on outcomes, focus on the process. Know that you will make mistakes and fail along the way, but that's all part of the process. So that's my summary of our discussion today. I'll give you a chance to summarize now. I'll re-ask you the three big questions. You can give us the rapid-fire answers here. So big question number one, how do we define performance and well-being, and what is their relationship to one another?
Define performance and well-being personally by truly understanding your values, priorities, mission, and then you take the steps to align them together and align them with the environment that you spend your time with, whether that's a team, an organization, your family. So really understanding the purpose behind your performance and your well-being is a synergistic ability to enhance both simultaneously.
Great. Question number two was, why does it seem like our performance and our well-being are in competition with one another?
Rapid fire for this one's hard to do rapid fire. So I think in our modern culture, performance is often seen as doing more or doing better, and well-being is often thought of as time away or time not doing anything. I think that's a mistake. I think that when you think about your performance as purpose-directed, process-oriented, You start to build wellness with deriving satisfaction and fulfillment at improving your performance over time. That's how you link them together, and that's how they are not at odds with each other. They're actually synergistic.
Great. And question number 3, what practical steps can we take now to allow us to achieve more while simultaneously improving well-being?
Take the time to understand your own values, the priorities you have, and what you want, your purpose. Link that directly to your efforts to improve your performance over time. And understand that when your performance is linked to a purpose that you have, wellness follows, well being follows.
Well said. So we always like to end with an action item or a challenge. So our call to action for this one is actually going to be a little bit redundant. We've used this before, but I'm going to say it again because I think it is so critical to so much of what we talk about on this program is that you have to know what your values are and your purpose and your mission. So that's going to be our call to action. So get out your notebook, whether you're old school pencil and paper like me or you're a little more savvy like Graeme and you do this on your phone, whatever. Get a notebook out and write down your values, your vision, your mission, your purpose, and start figuring that out. And it's not gonna be easy. It'll take you a little while, but get started in that process. And then once you do, tie that to both your performance at work or at home or wherever, and your well-being. And I think if you can do that, you're setting yourself up for success. But that has to be the first step, because if you start anywhere else, it's going to be performative and it's going to be just endurance and pain and suffering. So you have to start with that. So Graeme, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and wisdom with us today. It was an honor having you, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
That was great. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think this is an important subject. And like I say, it's not rocket surgery, but you do have to do the work. There's some effort behind it. None of it's that hard, but doing it can be hard. So just a call to action and give it a try. Play around with it and enjoy the journey.
Yeah, process satisfaction. I love it. To our audience, remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.